Hello, good evening and welcome to State of Affairs. My name is Ridwan Karim Dini-Osman. Today I am sitting with the EU Ambassador to Ghana, Dini-Osman. Madam, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you and good evening, everyone.
All right. I know you came to the country somewhere last year, I think the latter part of 2018. Well, I'm tempted to ask you about the proverbial Ghanaian hospitality, but it's obvious you are having fun with some of our local delicacies already. Are you not?
Yes, I am, and I have to say the country is keeping me very, very busy. The welcome that I got was very nice from everyone, very warm, and there is so much to do here. So I appreciate very much being in Ghana. As you can see, I am enjoying a local delicacy already, bisap. I have become an addict to bisap and to plantain chips. Oh, okay. So I'm indeed having a good time. Thank you.
Maybe one of these days you have to try the wache and the fufu. I'm sure you like it.
Fufu I've tried, yes, and I like it very much. Thank you.
All right, let's delve into our conversation, and I would want us to start with the issue of migration because it's been very topical on the global level. So over the last few years, the EU-Africa Summit has focused on the future of young people. But what we are grappling with now is the troubling present. How does the EU feel about all the goings on?
Okay, thank you. Let me take this question a bit from far away because I think we all need to put this issue in perspective. Migration is part of human civilization, so peoples have always migrated. So it's no question that we are starting to question it or to think that now we can stop it. Migration, it's also, now when you talk about migration in Europe, everybody thinks of migration from Africa to Europe. This is just a very small part of the reality. Africans, most of them when they migrate within Africa. I've seen figures between 70 and 80% of Africans who migrate in other African countries. This is not necessarily the same case for Ghana. Ghanaians, when they want to migrate, they like to go to Europe, to the US. But Ghana is also a country of immigration because actually there are a lot of nationals of neighboring countries that are coming to Ghana to seek better opportunities. So the seeking better opportunities is natural for the human being, and that's why most people migrate. And actually migration can be beneficial for everything involved, for the migrants themselves, for the countries that receive the migrants, because normally they come with a lot of goodwill to work and to contribute, and also for the countries of origin of the migrants, especially when the migrants eventually come back. This is why I appreciate very much the engagement that Ghana has with diaspora, because indeed diaspora is a huge richness. So, but at the moment in Europe, there is a perception that there is a migration crisis. There has been, particularly in 2015-16, a great increase of the influx, and politicians have taken sort of advantage of this to play their own agenda. So I think migration needs to be managed to be able to reap the benefits and to minimize the negative effects.
When you say that politicians have taken advantage to play their own agenda, exactly what do you mean by that?
Well, politicians may have an easier life if they look for an enemy. So at the moment there is a focus on these migrants apparently out of control that certain politicians use to sow fear and then insecurity in European people and to get votes for their parties. That's what I mean.
You're talking about European politicians?
Yeah, European politicians, yes, of course. I'm not talking about local politicians. There is another thing that needs to be said about migration. Irregular migration is very dangerous for the people who embark into it. And it is very often rather pointless because in most cases the people who try to embark on this perilous journey, they are stopped somewhere, they suffer a lot, and eventually they come back to their home country poorer than they have started. And I think that on this basis, you know, on reaping the possible benefits of migration, trying to stop irregular migration, which is basically a business for traffickers, and trying to manage migration together, because migration is a global phenomenon and it cannot be managed by anybody alone. But this is the basis of our conversation with Ghana at the moment on migration.
Okay, but let me just come in there, because the concern is that there's this unfair selection that Europe is doing. So the best of talent from Africa are welcome to Europe, but those with low skills, you know, are not allowed into Europe. And so some sort of brain drain, because we have a lot of Africans who are in high positions contributing to the European economy. But unfortunately, not much of what they do benefits their own people. So how do you respond to concerns about brain drain in this whole migration conversation?
I think the main problem in Europe at the moment is the sensation that people have, migration is out of control. We have no control of our borders. And that's where I think people are focusing, and that's where the problems are coming from. From the point of view of Ghana, I think to prevent this brain drain, the main thing to do is to create opportunity for young people in Ghana. And this is one of the points on which we are having a very good dialogue with the Ghanaian government. If you allow me to take a step back, you talked about the EU-Africa Summit, talking about migration. In 2015, as a response to what at the moment was a big increase of migration flows, there was this summit in Valletta, where European and Africans discussed together and came out with this Valletta action plan with 5 points to, again, fight against irregular migration, prevent people from dying at sea, and allowing, on the other hand, to reap the benefit of migration when it is regular. So the most important point, in my opinion, of the Valletta Action Plan is fighting against the root causes of migration. So fighting against the perception for a lot of young people in Africa that there are no opportunities for me here, I need to go. That's the main point on which we need to focus. And for that, in Valletta, the EU launched the Emergency Trust Fund for migration. And for that trust fund, there have been a lot of projects in many West African countries precisely to provide opportunities, to provide skills to young people that otherwise would migrate and indeed would contribute to this brain drain that you were talking about. In Ghana in particular, we have a few projects, but now we are going to do much more, because at the beginning, Ghana was not put as a priority country for this trust fund, so it didn't get individual projects. But this year, we are going to launch 2 projects between EU and Ghana, specific for Ghana, among which one of 20 million euro, which is going to provide skills, to provide job opportunities, to fight against climate change in regions which are particularly important as an origin of migration. And why I'm talking about climate change? Because that deprives people from agricultural livelihood, pushes people to migrate into cities, and very often that's the first step to then end up to the perilous journey that we would to avoid.
We'll talk about the interventions that the EU is making extensively. But let's still go back to the EU-Africa Summit. Largely, if you take a cursory look at what was agreed on, the EU perceives itself as having a severe short-term migration control problem. But at the conference, you are looking at a long-term solution to tackling the migration problem, which is development aid and education. That obviously creates some sort of long-term, short-term discrepancy. What would be your reaction to that?
The long term is the most important. The short term is indeed problematic at the moment in certain countries, but I think it's also the job of the politicians to explain to people what is really happening, so that at the moment there is no crisis, the arrivals have decreased.
People moving, still people migrating, trying to make their way into Europe. And it speaks to the urgency of the problem, that this problem of migration requires immediate solution, not the long term that is being recommended.
Immediate solutions to such a global long-term problem, I think, is a little bit difficult. As long as there will be big differences in income, real or perceived, in this case is real, between countries, people will always go and look for better opportunities. So I don't see any short-term solution to the migration problem or perceived problem, and the politicians who are trying to tell people that there is a short-term solution are not completely telling the truth. Let me be diplomatic toward the politicians in my own continent. So I think that it is important in the short term to have agreements with our partner countries in Africa, to try together with them to explain to the people who are trying to undertake this journey that, again, this is dangerous, that in most cases this takes nowhere. This is, by the way, one thing we are doing already in Ghana.
But, well, some have called for equal partnership between Europe and Africa. But I say that what perhaps is needed is a respectable sort of relationship where the EU would explain that, you know what, our interest is in economic development because it is good business for us. Our interest is in migration control measures because we have a bigger problem at home, which has to do with rising populism. What is the difficulty in clearly communicating this?
I'm not sure I understand completely your question. What I can tell you about this and about the partnership between EU and Africa is that this is indeed changing. Because last year, in September 2018, the President of the European Commission, Mr. Juncker, launched what we call the Africa-EU Alliance, which is, I think, partly what you are talking about. We want to have a shift of paradigm of the relationship between EU and Africa. We want to move on from the donor recipient relationship,
yeah.
But we want to have a partnership of equals, which is based on common values and also common interests. We want, in a way, a more frank and a more equal relationship.
Is that not because perhaps China is overtaking the EU and they are giving aid without any conditions attached to it?
Whatever the reason, I think it's a good thing to do. You know, we've been looking at Africa as a problem source for a long time. I think what we're going to do now, what we're trying to do now, is to look at the opportunity, because Africa is where economic growth is going to take place in the coming years. Population is going to double between now and 2050, a lot of young people, an emerging middle class. So I think now it is fair enough to say we want the development of Africa, not only, you know, for the interest of Africa. We want it for our own interest. And not only because we don't want all the migrants to come to Europe, we also want to come and invest to Africa. We want European companies to go to Africa, to make Africa rich, and also to get their profits. I think on this basis there can be a much better conversation. I compare it a lot to the Ghana Beyond Aid. I think it's the same concept.
We'll come back to the Ghana Beyond Aid, but let's still stay on the bit about partnership. And so Africa's population has an immense youth bulge. Europe, on the other hand, has a rapidly aging population. This seems like a strong basis for some fruitful partnership. Why hasn't this been on the radar?
Well, first of all, I think youth in Africa should primarily make Africa rich and stay in Africa, but not because we don't want them in Europe, because as you said correctly, we are going to have a shortage of young people in Europe.
They can't stay in Africa because the best talent in Africa have been taken to Europe. They are making it big, and the African continent doesn't have the incentives to compete with Europe to bring these best talents back to Africa. And so everybody thinks that if I go to Europe, that's where my dream is going to come true.
Well, we need to create the incentives. That's what we're trying to do with the Africa-EU Alliance. The Africa-EU Alliance is about, first of all, young people. So one of the big pillars of it is going to be skills development. Skills development in Africa, so wherever you will look in Africa, and you will have vocational training and skills programs financed by the European Union. We have one here in Ghana as well. And also to give the possibility to these youth to go to study in Europe and then come back and then bring their skills, the acquired skills here. Just to give you an idea, there are 1,000 people every year from Ghana going to Europe with different kinds of scholarship from the EU and the member states, and then they come back and they bring their skills back. We want to do this much more with the Africa-EU Alliance. The other key point that we need to tackle is, and that's really urgent, is the insufficient investment in Africa. both from Africa and from abroad. And by the way, you were talking about the competition of China. Chinese investment in Africa is good. We have never said that it's bad. There is a lot of good things that China is doing in Africa.
Because now the EU is having interest in a new strategy. Some experts, for instance, have described EU's Africa policy over the years as being a graveyard of big words, good intentions, platitudes, and unfulfilled promises. And so the EU has stood by. Now China is taking over, and they are looking at a new strategy in terms of cooperation with Africa.
If the China presence has been the incentive to do something good, this is fine by me. I'm telling you what the European Union is doing, and you know.
Is that an admission?
Whether or not this is because of China, I am not interested. If you want, I think what is interesting and exciting for me is the idea that we are going to change this paradigm. So the focus, or one of the focus, is going to be investment. We want to bring more investment to Africa, mobilize European capitals, but also African capitals. We have looked at why investment in Africa is insufficient in spite of the economic growth that there has been and the promise of economic growth that is going to be. There are a lot of constraints. One of them, maybe the most important, is that investment in Africa is perceived as high risk. So a big multinational can come, but a smaller company is afraid of coming to Africa. So we are looking at new financial instruments under what is called the External Investment Plan from the European Union to help those that otherwise would not come to Africa to come to Africa and to have less risk, to pay less interest, and to be able to invest in this country. One of the big problems in Ghana, I talk about Ghana because I know it, is access to finance.
Okay.
Interest rates are sky high. What we are trying to do with these new financial instruments is to reach out to people that otherwise would not get capital, for example, women, for example, young people, and to help them get the financing for the good ideas that may have.
Okay. Forgive me if I'm too Pan-African with my questions. I want to look at it, I mean, on the continent level and not just narrow it to Ghana. What has constrained the EU's capacity to convince Nigeria, for instance, to sign onto the Regional Economic Partnership Agreement?
Oh, don't get me started on that. That's the issue with which I've struggled for the last 3 years before coming to Ghana, sorry, when I was in Brussels. Okay, let's make another little step back. In Africa, there is a big problem. Another big constraint for Africa's development is not having regional or continental markets. And I'm very happy to see that Africans are now getting around to it because the continental FTA seems to be finally becoming a reality. We got 2 ratifications last week from 2 more countries that now will allow it to enter into force. That's a great thing because the lack of a big market is one of the main constraints identified by all the investors, European investors that I speak to, for coming and making more investment to Ghana or to other countries in Africa. So that's a very good thing. The problem is that there are a lot of vested interests in Nigeria and in other African countries that are preventing these big markets to see the light. And they are also preventing a big free exchange zone between Europe and West Africa to enter into force. Why Nigeria doesn't want to sign the Economic Partnership Agreement? Well, they have not signed the Continental FTA either, as far as I'm aware. Because there are very strong protectionist interests in the country, they are focused in one industrial association and in one company in particular. They have a big influence with the government, and the government is not signing because I think they can't see the potential benefits. They can't see what they're missing even. And I can assure you that my colleagues in Nigeria, they've tried all they could to explain to them, look, you're missing out on the European market. You don't have free access. Your neighbors have it. We haven't managed to convince them. My hope is that they will sign the Continental FTA that they will first get used to the idea and that one day will come
So the
round.
EU hasn't given up yet?
No.
All right. So you're still watching State of Affairs on GH1 TV. My name is Ridwan Karim Dini-Osman. Remember, State of Affairs is brought to you by Samsung. Samsung says, look sharp, get your Galaxy S10 and get 10 more gifts back. We are taking a short break. We'll be back. Welcome back to the program. This is State of Affairs, and tonight we are talking to the EU ambassador, or the head of the EU delegation to Ghana, Dina Ankochia. We started our conversation on migration because it's very big as far as global issues are concerned. And so I want us to talk about the option of secular migration. We have a lot of people who have low skills, and so they want to go to Europe, work and return to their countries. What is the difficulty in considering that option, for instance?
It is a possibility. It is something that they are discussing in Brussels between the European Commission and the Member States, because there is the idea of having this kind of program. And it is part of the discussions with the African Union under the EU-Africa Alliance, because indeed that would be a beneficial win-win situation. I cannot tell you anything more precise yet. At the moment, the possibilities are still, as I said before, a lot focused on studying. I hope that soon we can come with more news about this kind of programs.
Okay, let's move to the part that you are so excited about, and that is the interventions you're making so far. You look across the board and you realize that the issues of migration just doesn't involve the European Union. There are people who are also traveling to India, for instance, and other, countries. What is the holistic approach in tackling this problem, especially in the sort of assistance you provide to Ghana?
We have a very good dialogue with the government of Ghana. It's a dialogue based on, I think, on a common vision. Neither us nor the government want people to embark in these very uncertain journeys, be victim of traffickers, be detained, be injured. Sometimes they die at sea. So there is a very strong common message on that. Do not embark into irregular migration. It is very dangerous. And by the way, it costs a lot of money. I have spoken to a person who returned from Libya. He had been detained, and the IOM, the International Organization of Migration, with a program financed to European Union, helped him to come back and to set up an activity in Kumasi. The guy told me that he had spent 5,700 CDs for the trip. With that kind of money, I think in Ghana you can open a small business. So that's if you want, the absurdity. He lost his money, he was detained in Libya, he was beaten, he said suffered, but then he came back, and now, thanks to the help of IOM, he has set up a small business. He employs 3 people in a tailor shop. It was really heartwarming for me to see that we had really done something good. But this for me is the symbol of how pointless this journey is. And I'm sorry if I'm digressing, but I really wanted to say this and to profit that I have an audience. Now, what we are doing with the government of Ghana, we've had 2 meetings of what we call migration dialogue, in which we have had this holistic approach of discussing all the 5 pillars of the action plan that was agreed in Valletta. So we have discussed the programs under the trust fund. We have also discussed how we can cooperate, for example, with GIS to help Ghana control its borders. And we have also discussed how we can cooperate with the Ghanaian embassies in Europe to make sure that people who are found in Europe in irregular position may return to Ghana. Because we have to talk about everything. It has been a very good dialogue. We soon, I think actually at the second dialogue, that was the press was invited. It came on the newspapers. The cooperation is really very good, and one of the fruits of this cooperation is the programs that I was mentioning before.
But you talk about a transactional plan to economically empower a lot of young people, the people who are out of school and they are desperately looking for jobs. Because indeed, it is the search for a better living that drives a lot of them out of the country. How are we empowering them? Because people are not comfortable receiving training, being given handouts. They want investments. They want capital to start something doing.
That's what I was saying before the break. This external investment plan will hopefully also have the result of giving more opportunities to young people, and so that they refrain from trying to embark in irregular migration. The idea is to allow the people who have a good idea to be able to put the good idea in practice. But this is only one of the instruments that we have to help Ghana create jobs. We have a program which is called Local Development Program. It's a great program. I like it very much because basically every couple of years we put amounts, we launch a call for tender with certain amounts on the table, and we select proposals presented by local authorities in Ghana together with an NGO to create jobs in one of the regions of Ghana. And this is great because there's a lot of competition. Last year we got 70 proposals, we selected 5. And the drive is from the local authorities and the local governments. And actually, I would really like to go with you once to visit some of them.
I'll gladly join.
It's great. I just want to mention 2 which are really my favorites. And one we launched last month. We are going to, with an Italian NGO, we're going to finance the renovation of Fort Amsterdam in the central region. And that's going to be at the center of a program to develop tourism and to train people into the hospitality industry in the region. And another one that I launched last week is in the Adenta municipality, very close to here, and is going to support small-scale fish farming in the municipality. And this is the second program we do in Adenta. We've done one which is now finished to finance, to support the production of mushrooms. And that's a fantastic program. We are employing, I think 15,000 people are benefiting from that
that's
program.
Commendable.
It is fantastic, and I really would like one day to do a tour of the municipality with you.
I will gladly follow you.
To speak to the chief district, who is a guy with an incredible vision and full of good ideas. If we have a few of these in Ghana, they can create a lot of jobs with financing that for, let's say, European Union standards are not so high, because we are giving them less, let's say, between 500,000 euros to $1 million, which is, well, euro to dollars, you can see. I mean, it's not huge amounts of money, but they create an enormous amount of jobs for local young people, local women, and even people with disability. We always try to include people with disabilities.
Okay. Let's talk about the Ghana Beyond Aid agenda. How does the EU view it? Is it a distant mirage, or you think it's achievable?
For me, it's perfectly achievable. It is very important for the country to have shifted the paradigm, so to launch this kind of idea. We haven't seen yet exactly the content of the Ghana Beyond Aid agenda. We know it's been prepared and it's going to be published soon. And what the government will ask the development partners will be to decide together on the basis of the Ghana Beyond Aid agenda where we want to put our effort to support Ghana. I think Ghana can make it. Ghana has everything that it takes. It has the natural resources, but it also has a relatively, for the region, well-educated population, even if we could do much more. It has an industrial basis, even if we would like to diversify it and develop it much more. And I think it has a vision. So yes, I think Ghana can make it. Okay. And we will be very glad to help if we can.
Okay. I think somewhere in February this year, the EU issued a statement indicating that Ghana and a host of other countries have deficiencies in their strategies to tackle money laundering and terrorism financing. That statement didn't really go down well with the Ghanaian government, which issued a statement indicating that the methodology that was used is actually flawed because there was no engagement, no questions was asked, only for them to see a statement out indicating that Ghana has been blacklisted. Can you offer some explanations?
Okay, first of all, the blacklist was not issued anymore because the European member states voted it down, so there's no blacklist, just to be clear. On the other hand, though, Ghana is in negotiation with the FATF, which is an IMF body, on the questions of money laundering. And it was FATF that had identified certain shortcomings in the Ghanaian systems, so then the EU had picked that up and put Ghana in the EU list.
All right, so let's now move on and talk about security, which obviously has implications for even elections. I'm sure since you came into the country, you've heard the issue about political party militia groups and effort to tackle it. At least we know that there is a bill in Parliament to tackle the problem. But from where you sit, what have we lost focus of over the years?
Well, let me start with one important statement. Ghana's democracy, freedom of expression, peace and security are its most valuable asset. The EU attaches enormous importance to it. What makes the difference between Ghana and other countries around it that compete to attract investment, for example, is precisely democracy and peace and security. So my main hope here as a European Union ambassador is that this continues, that Ghana doesn't lose it. It is very, very important. And it is very, very important that parties talk to each other. I appreciate very much what I heard from His Excellency the President in the State of the Nation in Parliament in February.
The parties are talking. They have agreed on
and now they are talking.
Modalities. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's very, very important. I think we can, support politically. We can engage with civil society, which we do, but it has to come from the political parties in Ghana to find a way to have a dialogue and I think to build trust, because it is a question of trust. I am sure that the Ghanaian parties, the Ghanaian society can make it.
Okay, so the vigilantism bit is just one aspect of the problem. Now the other aspect is that now our security agencies are being confronted with non-traditional crimes. And so lately we are having a spate of kidnapping. There are 3 girls who are still missing in the western part of the country. How is the EU supporting government to retool these security agencies so that they will be able to tackle security challenges of modern times?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this question, because indeed we are very engaged with a lot of government agencies on these issues. We have, some years ago already, when we defined our strategy to cooperate with Ghana for the present period, governance was identified as one of the priorities. And so we launched a program which is called ARAP, Anti-Corruption, Rule of Law, and Accountability Program. It's 20 million euro that we are currently implementing, and we work with all the accountability institutions of the country. One of these is the police. A couple of months ago, I had the pleasure to distribute the new manuals of procedure for the police that were drafted with the help of this project of the European Union. So I was there at the ceremony together with the Minister Derry. It is very important for a country to have a police which is well equipped, up to date, and also which is respecting human rights and democratic procedures, because it's trust between the population and the police, I think, is key for the police to be able to function and to do their job. We are also supporting the judiciary. We have helped them to set up an electronic case handling system. So we are working also with the NCCE. They are making a campaign on anti-corruption all around the country. I don't know if you've seen the posters, the NACRA handshake is enough. Okay, we'll talk later. So under this program, we are indeed working with the police. And then we have also a lot of projects at regional level that are taking care of the wider threats, for example, terrorism, that is, of course, becoming very close to Ghana, particularly via the Sahel countries. We have regional projects because the threat is wider than Ghana, of course. The threat is regional, and we also support the region on maritime security. The Gulf of Guinea is unfortunately a place where crime, all sorts of crime, thrive. Drug trafficking, illegal fishing, which is also very important, piracy. So we're trying to help the countries to do all that. And regional cooperation is key among ECOWAS countries to tackle these challenges together.
Okay, so what you're saying is that even with the issue of terrorism, a lot is being done to ensure that in case of any attack, Ghana will be able to foil it.
We hope so. We understand the preoccupation that we have seen in Ghana because the threats are very important, and even if Ghana has in general stronger institutions than other countries in the region, for example the police or the border, it's still a lot for one country. That's why we are working, for example, with GIS. It's about migration, but it's also about defending themselves from threats. Border strengthening is very important, and I know that it's not only the European Union that is helping Ghana, it's also the US and other donors. It's very important to create a border that is able to function, let's say, to let the good movements pass, because of course we want to increase trade between Ghana and its neighbors, but that prevents the bad movements to come in. And that's, of course, that is not easy, because especially in the north, the border is very porous. So working with this kind of institutions is very, very important.
Dina and Koshia, thanks for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
All right. So that'll be it for State of Affairs. My name is Ridwan Karim Dini-Osman. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week.